I have a question.
Yes.
The links, is that just, you just check which ones, like if you have a list of like 5 layers, do you just check the ones that you want linked together, or can you tie specifically?
Right, you don't tie them to each other. They're either linked or they're not. So if you're modifying the linked layer, all of the other linked layers will be modified as well. Any other questions? Okay, the last thing that you might want to do with your basic photo editing skills is maybe you took a picture at night and it's a little bit dark and you want to brighten it up before you put it on your Facebook. This is simple to do as well. From the image menu, you can select, actually from the colors menu, you can select the brightness and contrast. And with the preview box selected, you can adjust it in real time to see what the resulting image will look like. So that's all there is to that. So those are some of the basic tools that your average photo editor might need to have with just their snap and shoot camera. As you start doing more image manipulation, you're going to discover that you're going to be using, you're going to want to do more advanced things. You're going to want to modify just portions of an image instead of whole sections, whole images altogether. So in order to do that, like I said before, whatever you're doing only works on the active selection, on the actively selected layer. It also only applies to the active selection. So I showed you earlier the rectangle tool and how I could use that to select Mr. Obama. Well, I'm going to use the rectangle tool again, and I'm going to select him. Now you can see these marching ants going around my selection there. So anything that I do will only apply to that selection. So I'm going to switch over to the pencil tool, which is just the most basic drawing tool. And I'm going to start drawing. And you can see a thick black line forming. Now once I get outside of my selection, you'll see that it stops drawing. I haven't let go of the mouse button, and to prove it, I'll come back in the box, and you'll see the line comes back. Now, of course, I'm drawing directly on my background image, my original image, which probably isn't what I want to do, and I wouldn't recommend you do that. Typically, make a new layer that's transparent and work on that instead. That way you can always go back to what you had before. So, the rectangle tool is the most basic selection tool. It will create handles for you so you can modify the selection on the fly. One of the things that you can also do is, let's say you want to select multiple portions at a time. You'll notice here in the toolbox I have different modes. I can replace the current selection, add to it, subtract from it, or intersect with it. So let's say I have this selection here. Let's say I've selected this much, and for whatever reason, I want to take this guy out, but I want to leave this motorcycle guy in. So I'm going to change my mode to subtract. You can also do this by simply holding down the control key, and you'll notice that my cursor changed there. Now there's a little minus symbol beside it, which means I'm going to subtract from the selection. So I'm going to draw a square around this guy, or a rectangle rather. And he's now no longer part of my selection. So if I start drawing again, of course I need to have that layer visible. So if I start drawing again, you'll notice I can draw on the active portion of the selection, but not on the part that's not active. So I've subtracted him from my selection, which allows me to do whatever I want without him. One of the things that you'll also find with selection tools is sometimes it's easier to select the portion you don't want instead of the portion that you do want. So to invert your selection, you can do that from the select menu and then select invert. There's also a hotkey, Control I. So if I do that, select invert, you'll see that now I can't draw on what I previously had selected, but I can draw on this guy.
Where did you do that?
From the select menu, invert.
Okay. The right is also not selected, that needs to be added.
Yeah, this is part of my selection now too, because it wasn't previously, so I can draw over here as well. One important thing to know about the selection when you're working with it is it's not simply an on-off. It's basically a grayscale image. So every pixel has an 8-bit value that determines whether or not, or how much, it's part of the selection. To demonstrate this, what I'm going to do, I'm going to close this. I'm going to create a new image. Just plain white background, and I'm going to create a rectangle selection, and I'm going to fill that with my bucket tool with black. Now, if I select all, Control A, you'll see that I have hard edges around that box. If I zoom in, by using the zoom tool, or Z, I can draw a rectangle around the area I want to view. I've zoomed in to that square, and you can see it's pretty sharp. I can keep zooming in, and I've zoomed in too far, but it's a pretty sharp corner. The selection, like I said, is actually an 8-bit value. So what I can do is I can select again, but this time I'm going to feather the edges of my selection. And it's going to have a radius of 10. Now this is going to make a lot more sense after you see it. So I've selected, and you can see I still have a rectangle selection. But now when I fill that rectangle selection in, you'll notice that the edges are soft. And that's because I feathered the edges, which modified my selection so that the edges aren't as selected. I'm not sure what the word is there, but they aren't as selected as the rest. To view your current selection, so I'm going to go back. So right now you see I have you see my marching ants, and you think, well, that's a rectangle. I can't tell that some of the edges aren't as selected as the inside. So what you can do in order to make that a little bit more clear is you can turn on the quick mask. There's an icon here in the bottom left corner where you can hit Shift Q. What that does is it gives you kind of a pink frame. And if I turn off the layers, you'll see more clearly. You can see that my quick mask shows me that I have a fuzzy selection there. Do you have a question?
Yeah, how do you do the dynamic zoom?
You can zoom, I'm used to using the keyboard pretty heavily, so if I do something without explaining it, feel free to just jump in and ask, how are you doing that? Zoom, you can zoom in by holding the Control key and then scrolling up on your mouse wheel, and scrolling down will zoom out. You can also pan the image by simply scrolling up and down, so I'm going to zoom in, and actually before I do that, I'm going to add some detail to this image just so that you can kind of see what's going on. So I'm going to zoom in here. If I want to pan up, I can scroll up. If I want to pan down, I can scroll down. If I want to pan left and right, I can hold Shift and scroll. And again, Control will zoom you in and out. You can also use the middle button to click and drag to pan around the image there. Any other questions? Okay, so far I've only talked about the rectangle selection tool. There are other selection tools such as the elliptical selection tool, which will let you select an ellipse. And of course you can select a circle as well.
If you deselected that, the rectangle or the fuzzy square, can you reselect it and change the fuzziness of the edges?
Well, in order to do that effectively, the best way to do it is to save your selection before you start making other modifications. So I'm going to back up here until the point where I have just that selection. So I haven't filled it in yet. I've just hit undo like 12 times, I don't know. So now I'm back. I have my fuzzy selection. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select, and then I'm going to, and this is the same as what's in the select menu. I just right-click to get here. I'm going to save this to a path. Now, paths are kind of a complex topic, and I don't intend to talk about them today. But to answer this question, I've got that selection saved as a path now. So now if I start modifying the image and I decide later on, ooh, I didn't like that, maybe I want to go back and do that, I have this selection saved as a path, so I can come back to it and I can reselect that selection. But that wasn't your question. Your question was, could I modify?
Right, so like if you have that selection and you fill it in with your paint bucket, but you have like a feather outside, once you've done that, you've made other modifications, you decide, well, actually I wanted to have a 12 feather instead of a 10.
Okay, so the way that I would probably do that, so here I've got it's happened already, it's a done deal. I can't get back to where I need to be to undo that, so I need to fix it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select and then shrink. Actually, I'm going to delete it. I'm going to delete what I had. I'm going to right-click, select, and then shrink my selection. I'm going to shrink it by a few pixels. And then I'm going to, from the select menu, select feather from here. So this will allow me basically, if I wanted to, I could just redraw the rectangle. So right now, I'm going to turn this off. So if I just have a hard selection, and I want to feather that selection, I can do that from the select menu. Shift B for the bucket tool. So now you can see these edges are even more feathered than before. So rectangle and ellipse select tools let you select rectangles and ellipses. The lasso tool here, it looks like a lasso. I think it's called lasso in Photoshop, but it's the free select tool. This will basically let you just draw whatever you want, and whatever you draw will be your selection. Double click to confirm. So this is my current selection, and whatever I draw will only apply to my current selection. The last select tool that I'm going to talk about intentionally is the fuzzy select tool, also called the magic wand. And basically what this tool lets you do is it will select, well, it says it right there, we got a tooltip. Select contiguous regions of a color. So if I have an image, let's close this one and open, let's open ugly sweaters. So I've got a background of these people here, and let's say I want to select that background. Well, fortunately for me, they're standing by a wall, and the wall is pretty much the same color. There's some shading going on there, but that's not a big deal. So I'm going to select my fuzzy select tool, the magic wand, and I'm going to click on the area that I want to select. So you can see there, I'm still holding down the mouse button, but you can see there it kind of gives me a preview of what it's going to add to my selection. If I drag the mouse down, you'll see in my toolbox there I have a threshold right now of 14.5. If I drag the mouse down, that's going to increase my threshold, which means it's going to include a larger area. It's going to select a larger color range. So if I keep dragging down, I can keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Of course, if I go too far, I might start doing something I don't want, like getting pieces of her sweater in there. Or maybe I do want that. And of course, if you drag up, it will narrow your selection. So the fuzzy select tool is probably one of the tools that I use the most often. Besides that, there's also the select by color tool, which works similarly to the fuzzy select tool, except that it doesn't have to be a contiguous region. It will scan the image, the entire image for similar colors. So I'm going to select her black pants here, and you can see it's scanning the image for all black. And of course, with the image select tool, similar to the fuzzy select tool, I can drag it down to increase the threshold and drag it up to decrease it. So that's a handy one as well.
Can you control click to add?
Yeah, so just like the other select tools, Control will subtract from the selection, Shift will add to the selection, Alt, Shift, no, Control, Alt, I don't know. All of your modes are over here, and they have the hotkeys there too. So if you wanted to intersect, it's Shift, Control. Yeah, you can see the magic happening there. All of the select tools have those different modes. So let's say I want to get my head. So I'm going to draw a rectangle around my head, but I don't want the color behind it. I'm going to select my fuzzy select tool. I'm going to hold down the Control key, which changes my mode to subtract, and I'm going to click in that white area. So now I'm subtracting from my current selection the white area around my head, and I'm dragging down to increase the threshold. And I'm dragging, and that looks like about what I want. So now I have just my head selected. So one of the things that you also might want to do, something else that's handy, real quick, I'm going to back up to where I had, I lost it. I'm going to select more portions of this again, and what you'll notice, I'm going to, actually I'm going to select it here. So I've got a section of the wall selected here, and I'm going to add an alpha channel to this layer so that you can see what's happening when I delete. So I'm going to add an alpha channel, and I'm also going to add a black layer. Black right now is my background color, so I'm going to select background color when I create a new layer. And I'll move it down to the bottom and rearranging my layers. So the black layer is now on the bottom. I'm going to select what was my background layer, and I'm going to delete from it, which now that it has an alpha channel means I'll be able to see